Good evening. I don't know why Dele said to go down. You know, he slanders me all the time. Okay, Dele gave me a topic, which I amended slightly. He wanted me to speak on how we can stop reproducing poverty on an industrial scale. And, you know, in my new role now as Emir, I have learned to be a bit more diplomatic in my choice of words. And so I'm just calling this Perspectives on Development in Africa, but hopefully, we'll get there through a more diplomatic route. So what I'm going to do today is talk to you, share some views about my own perspectives on African development today, the changing world in which we are, what I think we need to focus on, and hopefully a lot of the conversation will come up when I sit with Francis after the presentation. In a very basic sense, you've seen enormous improvements in living standards over the last 65 years. You can see from these two maps what has happened to life expectancy over that period. In the developing world, it was only half of what was in the United States. It's now beginning to close the gap. And we've seen improvements all over. The same thing with the poverty numbers. We've had major improvements in living standards globally. Hunger, poverty, illiteracy, and child mortality have all been reduced by 40 to 50% relative to their 1990 levels. And this graph shows that. However, now this is distribution between different poverty thresholds, and this is basically sub-Saharan Africa, but you have regional disparities. In every region of the world, poverty has come down, apart from sub-Saharan Africa. So you can see sub-Saharan Africa, we've moved up from 1990 to 2015. So the global reduction in poverty masks increase in poverty levels in Africa. And if you followed the Goalkeepers report last year with Bill Gates, the numbers have been alarming. In the last 40 years, China has lifted almost 700 million people out of poverty. And according to the Gates Foundation, by 2050, 85% of extreme poverty in the world will be on the African continent. And half of those will be in Nigeria and DRC. Now, one of the major drivers of poverty is the population growth. Median projections show that by 2020, by 2100, right? Africa will cross the 2 billion mark if we continue at this rate. Fertility rates are among the highest in the world. In Chad, 6.3, Nigeria, 5.5, Ghana, 4, Egypt, 3, India, 2.7, Brazil, 2.5, Iran, 1.9. And within the countries, you've got regional variations. So in Nigeria, you'll find much higher fertility rates in the north, where you also have the highest levels of poverty, as we'll see, than in the south. So we use Nigeria as an example and try to see what patterns can we have. Across income levels, the poorest tend to have the highest fertility rates. The education of girls is a major driver. The higher the levels of education of girls, the lower the fertility rates. And then the region, obviously, is just a reflection. So in Nigeria, the northwest is where you have the highest level of, lowest levels of girl child education, the highest number of out-of-school children. And that's where you also have the highest fertility rates, so you've got this condition. So from this, we can begin to say, what do we need to begin to look at? And here I'm playing my role as an advocate of the UN SDGs. You've got 17 of them. I told them from the beginning that I'm interested in only 2, SDG 4 and SDG 8. I'm not interested in all of them. I'm interested in subsets of that. I'm interested in girl child education, and I'll say why. I will come to that. I believe that the single silver bullet that will solve 70% of our problems in Africa will be the education of the girl child. And an opportunity for women to earn a living, because that deals with malnutrition, it deals with infant mortality, it deals with maternal mortality, it deals with child spacing, it deals with extreme poverty. All the HDIs that are today embarrassing us basically begin to disappear once we keep girls in school longer, improve the quality of the education, and then give them an opportunity to earn something. So ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education, especially for girls, and promoting sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full employment, and work for all, especially for women. A number of countries have realized this, and at least policy statements have been made. In Nigeria, there is a policy around population, which we hope will be implemented, reducing national population growth to about 2%. Nigerian population has been growing in northern Nigeria at the rate of about 3.4% annually. That means the population has been doubling every 20 years. Now, if you think of northern Nigeria in 1960 and today, at that rate, you now have 8 times as many people living in northern Nigeria as were there in 1960 in the same area, on the same resources. And then your farmlands have become houses, your grazing routes have become farmlands, and you have conflicts between herders and farmers, and you don't understand where the conflict is coming from. You're producing children, and they're all roaming the streets. In Kano State alone, we have 3 million children out of school. The system cannot cope, and we don't understand where that is coming from. Children are dying. In my state, Kano, 58% of all under 5 children suffer from malnutrition. 48% of all women of reproductive age are anemic from iron deficiency. As a result, we have one of the highest infant mortality rates in the world, one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world. But the solution is not to keep saying, find money to build more hospitals, find money to build more schools. That is part of the solution. You also have to reduce the rate at which these children are just being produced. You've got to slow down. You need a demographic transition so that the resources of the state and society can cope. And every country that has made this economic transition had to have that demographic transition. So these are clearly stated objectives and targets. What we have not seen are the actual steps being taken. Okay, for us in Kano, we've just developed a codification of Muslim family law. It should have been passed by now, if not for some roadblocks that we faced. Maybe I'll pass the law to Kaduna. But that law deals with issues around age of marriage. It deals with issues around regulating polygyny. It deals with contraception, because many of these concerns are also not technical. They're cultural, they're religious. So we require social policy. You need to talk to people to look at their attitude towards girl-child education, their attitude towards age of marriage, their attitude towards polygyny, their attitude towards family planning. This is you need this, and this is why in this role as Emir, I find that the traditional institutions have a major role in development. In Egypt, they're using incentives to keep children low. They don't have a one-child policy, but if you have only one child, the state will pay for that education up to university level. If you're a welfare recipient, you can't have more than 2 children. It makes sense. If you're going for welfare, why start producing children? If you know you can't feed one more than 2 children, why go and have more? And I'm glad we have Governor Erufai here. This is the kind of thing we're trying to encourage. People who can't maintain one wife in northern Nigeria go and marry 3 wives. They have 10 children. You know, it's the poorer you get, the more wives you marry. And it's we're telling people that, look, You have a right to marry 4 wives, but you don't have a right to starve them. You don't, you don't have a right to make them suffer. You've got to be able to maintain them. So that negotiation of that space is what we're trying to do. And it's been very difficult. Now, the role of finance, because that's socialism, it's got to do with finance. Today, you have almost you have about $17 trillion parked in negative yielding bonds in the world. It's a great challenge. How do you get $17 trillion? How do you get that out into development? And this is where I think all the finance gurus in this room need to put their heads together on. The DFIs need to come up with innovations. You've got EFTB. 2 years ago, I think they did the Marina bond, the synthetic bond. You've had this MEGA providing a guarantee of $299 million to Senegal, swap with Standard Bank. But these are small. We need to unlock hundreds of billions of dollars out of the $17 trillion now, earning negative returns, and see how we can put that into power, into infrastructure, into agriculture in Africa. China's influence is declining, and this is China. If you think of the United States after the Second World War, the US had huge current account surpluses. That was when they had the Marshall Plan. That was when they set up the World Bank, they set up the IMF. And then those surpluses disappeared. When they disappeared, the US stopped being a lender to the rest of the world. China has historically had huge surpluses. Those surpluses are declining. As you can see, in 2018, China actually ran a current account deficit for the first time in decades. Now you've got the trade war with the US. You probably are going to have some form of negotiation of tariffs with Europe. Everybody's going to follow, and the rest of the world, even Africa with AFTA. If AFTA is going to work, it's going to be free trade among African countries, and we've got to build barriers to other parts of the world. I mean, that's the only way it's going to work. Otherwise, we're nowhere. You're simply going to open up Africa, up different routes for the same deindustrialization to happen. So the point is, China is not going to have this money forever, and it's going to stop lending. And we'll come to our slides to see how important Chinese money has been for Africa so far. The second reason is that China itself has clearly redefined its model. It's going to focus on domestic consumption-led growth. Exports are no longer the growth driver when it's big markets like the United States are getting hostile. Domestic investment is not going to be a major driver because you actually have an investment bubble in China. So what's happening is Chinese capital is flying out of China. I was in China last week. I spoke to some of the senior officials responsible for the Belt and Road Initiative. And what I hear from them is no longer providing finance to build roads in the Belt and Road area, but encouraging SOEs and private companies to move out of China and set up factories in other parts of the world. So it's really competition. Some African countries are already getting them. The Ethiopians have gotten quite a number. The Rwandans, the Kenyans. It's about all of us going out on a beauty parade and making sure that that investment doesn't go to Bangladesh or Pakistan, but to the African continent, and on terms that will improve not just GDP, but national income. So global context changing. If you look at Africa and China, that's why the free trade agreement is important, not just in terms of its promoting free trade within African countries, but we must understand that if you turn Africa into a trading bloc, then Africa as a trading bloc has to negotiate with the rest of the world. One of the reasons I supported the trade agreement is it has always been an unfair negotiating process. When China sits to negotiate with Europe, it sits with the EU. China sits with the United States. But when you have a trade agreement between China and Nigeria or China and Rwanda, the playing field is not level. Hopefully, the African continent as a whole can negotiate better, and hopefully we can protect the borders better, and hopefully if we can all agree, we can protect the industries within the African continent better. Now, in a trade war, the country that runs the current account deficit is usually the winner. And African countries are all here with negative current account balances. I mean, this is the reason Donald Trump is fighting China. We may not agree with what he's saying, but ultimately, in that trade war, and if you look at it just in terms of pure trade, the US will be the winner because China benefits more from that relationship. Now, the US might lose other things that he's not looking at: the strategic importance of China, the geopolitical stability, the other long-term benefits of a friendship, which I think short-termism is blinding US too. But in terms of pure trade issues, the US will be the winner in a trade war with China. And if African countries can begin to protect their domestic industries, they would ultimately be the winners. These are the patterns of structural change. In theory, this is how we should move from informal agriculture to organized manufacturing to services. In sub-Saharan Africa, what we've been doing is we've remained in agriculture, we've remained informal. We need to improve that and have proper structural change moving into manufacturing and into services. Now, this does not obviate the need for improving agricultural productivity. And again, when you look at what's happening in the rest of the world, in Nigeria today, we have average yields on maize of about 2.2 metric tons per hectare, less than 3, even on rice. So when people produce 5 metric tons, 6 metric tons, 7 metric tons, they celebrate. I went to Hunan, the Hybrid Rice Institute in China, and they're producing 15 metric tons per hectare on their farms, 17.5 metric tons per hectare in their laboratories. So I'm chairman of a company called Babongo. Now we do social impact, and we've been celebrating when some of our farmers get 5 metric tons, and all of a sudden I got so totally deflated, I realized that we know where, because we're looking at 2.2 to 5, we thought, oh, this is great, but when other places are doing 15, we shouldn't be happy with 5 metric tons. And to be honest, before you get enough capital in, fix power, fix infrastructure, build industries, create markets, you need to have the quick wins. And the first quick win is improving agricultural productivity and farm incomes then before we go anywhere. So if you look at this Punnett Square, how do foreign investors see Africa? Look at the world, and you divide that. You've got commodity exporters and manufactured good exporters, and the deficit countries and surplus countries. You've got this distribution of the world. But then where's Africa? There's no one that's in current account surplus as a manufactured goods exporter. The all producing countries and the rich countries have current account surpluses, but that's it. And that is where we need to be. Okay, so that's really where every African country should aim to be. So I suppose the question for economic policy makers is, what do we need to do? I was speaking to someone this afternoon and said, simple issues of coordination. If you look at the Gulf countries, many Gulf countries have what they call a Ministry of Power and Industry. It's very simple. In my country, we generate a lot of electricity and put it on the grid. It goes on the grid. You don't know where it's going to end up. You need to produce power, put it on the grid, and that power should go to special economic zones, to industrial parks. If people want electricity to watch their Arsenal versus Manchester United game, they can do an off-grid solution. They don't need grid power, or for DSTV, they don't need grid power, So, but everybody is on the grid, and most of them are not paying. So you basically have the power, but the power is not powering production. So simple coordination issues. Sometimes it's not money; it's just thinking through I'm glad we have broken up Ministry of Power, Works and Housing. I never could see the connection between the power and works and housing. You know, they're just too. So having that coordination would have a major positive impact on us. Chinese geese are beginning to fly to Africa, but as you can see, the number of large global supply chain companies is still small. But the reality is that China is ready. We need to go there. We need to go and talk to them. And every time I go there, I see a desire to come, because I think the Chinese do understand that the old model they've had has reached its limit. You can't continue lending money to African countries to build roads from nowhere to nowhere, you know, and then end up with bad debts that cannot be paid, you know, and then end up creating a resentment among the people. And what you see with the United States is just a sign of a general dissatisfaction with the manner the relationship has gone. It's not the fault of the Chinese, of course, because when you talk to them, they'll say, look, we never said to them, come and borrow. If you come to us and say you want to borrow money, we lend to you. We just don't think it is our business to tell you what to do. Now, I think they do understand that that model has run its course. We now need to get them to come and invest. We need to, look, leather and footwear production is no longer profitable in China. Textiles and garments are not very profitable. You've got so many low-value industries. The Chinese are overproducing steel. They would like to build smelter plants outside. The new plan, they actually want to reduce and close down steel production. So there will be steel production moving out of China. And if we don't move as Africa to bring them near the bauxite sites, whether it's in Nigeria or in Congo, Conakry, and so on, they're going to go elsewhere. So we need to take advantage of that. The strategy of China is now aligned to the needs of Africa, but we've got to take advantage of that. And some African countries are doing it. Rwanda is doing it. Ethiopia is doing it. Ethiopia has done it forever, starting from Meles. The Kenyans are doing it. Now the Ghanaians, Cote d'Ivoire, Senegal. So we've got great examples. I tell people that 10 years ago, we used to tell African countries, oh, look at Brazil, look at Russia, look at China. Now we can tell African countries, look at Rwanda, look at Ethiopia. Now the problem is the biggest economies in Africa, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, who together constitute about 50% of GDP, are not doing well. And we need those countries to lead in industrialization. South Africa was uniquely placed. They had built an alliance with China. They had gotten into financial agreements. China was going to use Johannesburg as a foothold into the rest of Africa. But South Africa's position as the gateway to Africa is threatened with these bouts of xenophobia. You lose it. You know, you can lose that entire thing overnight. You know, so we just have to get our act right. Now you have new risks that are emerging. If we're talking about poverty, gross government debt to GDP ratios. As you can see, SSA over South Africa. The numbers look low, but we'll come to the next slide and you'll see what is disturbing. So you look at a country like Nigeria and you say, oh, you know, debt to GDP ratio is just 30% or 25%, and you think it's a low number. Then you look at debt service to government revenue, and you're at 70%. Because your tax revenues on GDP are only 6%. It's only 6% of GDP. So, and you don't, and you know, when I was in central bank, I used to complain about this number because I was a credit officer in the bank. You don't pay debt out of GDP, you pay debt out of revenue. So this number is totally useless. It's totally useless. You know? If only 10% of your GDP is paying tax, that is the relevant base for borrowing. You know, you've got an agricultural sector that's 40% of GDP that pays no tax. You have an informal wholesale and retail trade sector that pays no tax. I mean, who pays tax? The oil sector, import exports, which are also tied to the oil sector because there's a strong correlation. When oil price goes up, we earn more and we import more. We get more import duty. When oil price goes down, you have the reverse, you know. And maybe the formal multinational corporations. Who else? And so when you go up to 20, 30% of your GDP, you may actually be at near 100% of the tax-paying segment of your GDP. And that's a big problem. And this is a problem, I think, with many of the countries in Africa. If you take out countries like Botswana and Rwanda, and then those that have concessionary loans throughout. Now, what is the result of that? Debt service to revenue. This is pre-HIPC and post-HIPC, estimated in 2019. Most countries in Africa now have debt service to revenue ratios that are much, much higher than before debt relief. I mean, this is where Nigeria was at the point of debt relief. This is where we are now. And if you remember, Nigeria went for debt relief. It was we all felt the country was about to go bankrupt at that time. But look at where we are now. You know, look at Egypt. Look at Ghana. Look at Angola. I mean, that's where Africa. Because what happened was after the debt relief, what happened? We just went back and started building up domestic debt, issuing treasury bills, issuing bonds, and 10-year money, 15-year money, 20-year bonds, developing a bond market for traders like Francis to buy bonds and, you know, and make money. And then, okay, what did we use the money for? We paid salaries, we paid overheads, we didn't build power plants, we didn't build industries, we didn't build good roads, we didn't build rail lines. So we've got this huge stock of debt that has really all gone into consumption long ago. We can't even show. If you say this is structure of debt, you cannot show what is on ground today that corresponds to that value of debt. So if you're a company and your liabilities exceed your assets, you're already bankrupt. If you liquidated all the assets, you wouldn't pay off the debt. And this is the case with everyone here. And these are huge risks. And again, this model has reached its limit. You cannot continue borrowing to service debt. You can't continue borrowing to pay salary. You know, you've got to take some hard structural decisions. Now look at the composition of debt in sub-Saharan Africa. The red line are Chinese bilateral loans. So in places like Republic of Congo, and Egypt and Mozambique. Someone told me a story about DRC, about a Chinese loan that was taken with a very beautiful highway. And literally, it started from nowhere to nowhere. Literally. No one can explain why that road was built, what it is for, where it is taking you. No one. It was built with debt. And there are many examples of that. I imagine the Chinese themselves have learned that you can't continue like that, but a lot of this debt may not come back. What have we had? We've had big improvements in living standards, but obviously the benefits of globalization have not been spread evenly. We all know that. Globalization has made parts of the world extremely rich. It's made other parts extremely poor. And within those poor countries, we've also had increased income inequalities. And, when you go below the national level, you even have clarity. I take Nigeria. If you look at the Oxford Human Development Indices, on a global basis, you will be told incidence of poverty in Nigeria is 45%, which is bad. When you break Nigeria into regions, in the southwest, poverty is at 20%. in the Northwest is at 80%. In the same country. And if you go further down at the state level, in a state like Lagos, incidence of poverty is less than 9%. In Zamfara, it is more than 90%. Kano is the most populous state in the country. We have an incidence of 75 to 77%. And yet, maybe the two richest men in Nigeria, well, the richest man in Africa is Aliko Dangote, and maybe the next richest, Abdul Samad, they're both from Kano. But then you've got 77% of the population in extreme poverty. So you don't just have regional disparities within, in the world, you then have huge and increasing inequalities among individuals and corporations. So we need to have great levels of investment, and frankly, we don't have, I know we talk about raising domestic savings and raising VAT, but for the kind of investments you need, you're going to have to play catch up. What we need is to see how we can attract that $17 trillion there, and how we can get the investors to come in, how we can get the Chinese to come and set up their factories, and others who are interested, global players. That is the kind of capital we need to come in now, create the jobs, create the income, and then begin to have savings. You really, when people are hardly able to feed themselves, they're not going to save. They're not going to pay taxes. That's the truth. I mean, you save after you've met your basic consumption needs. You get taxed when you earn more than you need, and the vast majority of people simply cannot. So we shouldn't be putting the cart before the horse. Taxing poor people today is not going to increase the economy, it just puts them into difficulty. Okay, so we need to rethink the merits of hyperglobalization. Frankly, we need to, and this is not a new statement. I'm glad Francis said he read my article in 2013, 2012, when I was in the central bank. I did an op-ed in the Financial Times, which was extremely controversial at that time, where I said Africa needed to review its relations with China. And I've said it in many places. I love China. I don't have a problem at all. My father was Nigeria's first ambassador to China. And I think China offers great opportunities for Africa to develop, but I think Africa has not built that relationship in a manner that will lead to development. Okay, we have spent our time borrowing money, giving contracts to Chinese companies to build roads and build tracks, and building the Chinese economy, importing cheap finished goods from China and deindustrializing Africa. We can have a win-win situation where we produce the goods in Africa and sell in Africa, use our own raw materials, use our own labor, and then they can repatriate their capital. And that's fine. They want to make money. They don't have to produce in China. They can produce in Nigeria and take the money out. And this is really where the negotiation happens. And this is where some African countries have gotten it right. Meles did this with leather in Ethiopia. Stopped exporting leather to China. Now the Chinese have a huge leather industrial park outside Addis Ababa, producing shoes and bags and selling to the best brands in Europe. If you did that in Kano, you don't even need to export to Europe. 200 million Nigerians, if you just produce shoes for school children, that's more than enough, in terms of a market. Textiles and garments, the Chinese are in Madagascar. So we can go and do this. And so we do have models now built by African countries that work. And we need to spread that message across. We now have peer lessons that we can learn. So I suppose for me, Africa is not all bad news. But the bulk of Africa in terms of concentration of incomes and population is bad news. We need to get South Africa, Nigeria, Egypt, DRC working. All the fast-growing countries in Africa, all the countries that are doing well combined, do not account for more than 20% of African GDP. And that's why we're not going to see the impact on the continent until these big countries get it right and show the leadership. So what can we learn from Rwanda? What can we learn from Meles in Ethiopia? What can we learn from how the Chinese did it, okay, and now that they're moving on to higher value industries, step into those shoes and industrialize. And then also deal with the demographic transition, which we need, because we cannot continue growing at the rate at which we're growing, outstripping the rate of growth in GDP. So if you ask me, how can we stop manufacturing poverty on industrial scale? It comes down to the question, how do you have a demographic transition and an economic transition so that the youth bulge that we have will be a dividend and not a disaster? We have 200 million Nigerians. The median age is 19. In the next 20 years, we're going to have 100 million Nigerians between the ages of 20 and 40. Put that in perspective, Germany is the world's third largest economy, population 85 million. You need an economy for 100 million youth. It's tough. But then 40 years ago, when Deng started opening up in China, China had 700 million people living in extreme poverty. Today, China has only 30 million in poverty. When Deng started opening up, China had only 8 million university graduates. Today, China has 300 million holders of degrees and their equivalent. That's more than the population of the United States, and it's the world's largest manufacturing economy. So they did it in 40 years. Why can't we?
Congratulations on very thought-provoking remarks. Living completely up to the title for this evening's talk, which is Dinner Provocations. By way of introduction, my name is Francis Daniels. I live in Johannesburg, from Ghana. So I come from one of the rounding error countries. And I live in one of the countries which do matter. And what I do is manage a couple of funds which invest across Africa with a value investment orientation. What I'd like us to do is to have a conversation with His Highness, quizzing him about the remarks he's made. I'll naturally be selfish. My colleagues know that I'm inclined that way. And so I'll spend a little bit of time asking my questions. But what I'd like you to do as I speak is think about your questions. What we have today is a unique setting. And the reason it is unique is that most of Africa's leaders have been leaders who do not come from the historical African ruling elite. In His Highness, we have a very rare occasion. We have a person who has excelled in independence Nigeria, and at the same time is a traditional leader. So we have someone who can answer our questions for both the traditional as well as the modern. Based on your ending and your reference to the accomplishments of Deng Xiaoping, I thought about remarks made by the late Lee Kuan Yew on meeting Deng. and how he was struck by Deng's adherence and respect for reality and the problems that reality throws up. So I thought it might be fitting to start our discussion with some reflections from you about why the African rulers seem to be allergic to confronting reality. The statistics that you have put up there, the GDP statistics you put up there, signify an inability to grapple with reality. What are your thoughts?
Okay, I mean, it's true. I think that in many parts of Africa, we do tend to run away from reality. And we run away from numbers. And sometimes when I go to events, I like shocking people by giving numbers. Now, when you stand in front of Africa leaders and say, in my state, 58% of all the under 5 children suffer from malnutrition. 48% of women of reproductive age are anemic from iron deficiency. X number of children of every 100,000 die at childbirth. Those numbers hit when you say 3 million children are out of school. People don't want to hear the numbers. They're fine with your saying there's poverty, they're fine with your saying there's malnutrition, they're fine with your saying there's children out of school, but those numbers are just too scandalous. But until we accept that reality, not just that, what that reality entails in the future, and what it says about us, we're not going to move forward. So take out of school children. We throw these numbers around casually. You'll be told that, 1 out of 6 out of school children in the world is Nigerian. Okay, in my state, 3 million children out of school. The numbers are bandied around casually. But if we just stopped and thought, even within Nigeria and the geopolitics of Nigeria and regional competition in Nigeria, the 3 million children out of school in Kano, their age mates in Anambra and Lagos and Rivers are in class. They study mathematics, they study English, they study biology, they study computer science. In the next 20 years, you're going to have employments into multinational corporations, into banks, into the civil service, into the army, into the police, into the air force, and they're looking for graduates. And you're going to find that they're filled by those who are in school today. Long after we're gone, what is that generation of Nigerians going to say about us, who did not educate them when their mates were educated? In 20, 25 years, you go to a hospital in parts of the north, and you would find that if you have a doctor who's Nigerian, he's probably from Oyo or from Anambra. If you see somebody from the north, he's probably sweeping the floor, or a guard, or washing plates. So for me, I think what will change is when everybody who is in a position of responsibility starts thinking not in terms of what do I do to please those who are going to vote for me in the next 3 years. These children don't vote. They don't vote. They are not going to affect your election. But think about 20 years from now, what will they say about me? When the history of this state is written, or this country, or this emirate, in the next 50 years, in a classroom, and think about your reign, how would you be remembered? And when you think of all the great leaders of the world, whether it's Lee Kuan Yew, or Deng Jawabin, or Nelson Mandela, they're people who thought beyond themselves. They're people who realized that being a governor, being a president, being an emir is a gift. Few people actually have that opportunity to write their names into history. And we're wasting that opportunity. You made a head of state, you made a governor, you made an emir for 6 years, 8 years, and you waste that opportunity, you're gone. I mean, we've got people who have been governors in my country for 8 years. You see them now, you don't even recognize them. They can't even go back to their state. They can't even go back. I mean, we have friends here. They know it's true. They can't go. They have to move around in bulletproof cars. So this is not even, they have not even written themselves into the present. You know? And you talk about people who want to write their own history long after they've gone. Today we talk about our law, talk about Ahmad Bello. Why? Those who were writing the histories and talking about the heroes were beneficiaries of policies these leaders put in. And I think we just need to do more of that. And I would, again, to be fair on Africa, I have seen leadership that I respect. You know, I've seen people who've taken bold decisions. I've seen, okay, if you take Meles of Ethiopia, it's just amazing what he did. If you take Kagame of Rwanda, it's amazing what he's done. Yeah.
Well, I mean, it would be irresponsible of me to admit that there are some African leaders who have been statesmen. But I think the more telling question is really whether we have our fair share of statesmen. One of the things which allow me to be a little skeptical about what you've said. One of the things which has I noticed about countries like China, South Korea, Japan, Germany, countries which are now models to which we look up and we admire, is that in every single instance, they had a serious external enemy. In the case of the Chinese, they had the Russians, the Japanese. In the case of the Japanese, they had the Koreans and the Chinese. The South Koreans had the North Koreans. The Germans had the East Germans when they were West Germany. It seems the threat of losing power to a foreign enemy is an extremely potent propellant of manufacturing and development. When you look at Africa, Africa seems to African governments seem to be very good at intimidating their citizens and very weak at frightening others. So the question I have for you is, how can we substitute the external with the internal? How can we make African leaders terrified of their own so that they develop them?
You know, look, you've made a number of generalized statements that we can spend a lot of time debating here. I wouldn't, for example, consider the Chinese government exactly a very liberal and benign government that does not intimidate its people. I wouldn't consider the Japanese during the period of the Meiji Restoration, for example, to have been extremely free people. Lee Kuan Yew was nobody's liberal. You know, I'm not sure that it's all about external threat. So take China, which is a country that I have been fascinated by in many respects. I don't have those rules. I'm not blind to its faults, okay? But how did Deng start? What was the driving force for Deng? A group of economists went, locked themselves up somewhere, came to him and said, we need to try something else. We've been trying this for so long, and this was produced. When he started, he was heavily criticized. The system didn't like it, didn't like the opening up. They said, we are abandoning communism. He had one answer. He said, communism should not mean that we should all be poor. That was his answer. He said, it's simple. You know, people just, if you had a system that had just produced 700 million people at near starvation levels, you had to do something different. And when he started with Shenzhen and Shanghai and Guangzhou, there were complaints about some parts of China growing faster than others, but look at what's happening now. They're pulling up the other parts. Okay? Now, if today an African leader were to say, take Nigeria. Look, I don't see why Kano, Aba, Lagos, for example, cannot be taken as nodes of growth. Kaduna, since my brother is here, it cannot take as nodes of growth. If you were to say, we don't have enough resources to spread over 774 local, let us take some key points in this country and create growth engines that would then pull up the rest of the country. The first thing you're going to have is debates over which ethnic group is benefiting from where, which look. You understand? So we need to, the conversation has to improve. And it's not just about the leaders, it's about the people. Decisions that are taken, and look, even in educated, look at the French today, look at all the yellow vests. The decisions Macron has taken are decisions that everybody knows the French need to take. The decisions that Germany took a long time ago. The structure of the French state cannot continue like that if France wants to remain competitive where the rest of Europe is. But even in France, and these are highly educated people, when they look at all the violence and the demonstrations that we're having every weekend with the yellow vests. So I think I think people have handled it differently. And again, I give examples of Ethiopia, I give examples of Rwanda. When Meles decided he was going to change his model, he stood up. He said to the IFC, come. Look, I'll give an example with coffee in Ethiopia, and I'm sure you know that. When Meles started, the Ethiopians were getting 10% of the value of their coffee. They're producing coffee beans. Okay? He got the IFC, got the coffee industry, Starbucks, said, look, if this is our coffee that's been sold by Starbucks after being processed in Brazil or somewhere, why don't you come and show us how to get it to the level that you want? And he got to a point where you would take coffee straight from an Ethiopian farm and company into a Starbucks shop.
Right.
And the farmer moved from getting 10% of that of his product to 60% of his product. What is the result? According to the Goalkeepers report, by 2040, Ethiopia would eliminate poverty. So if you have a country in Africa that's going to eliminate poverty, the question is, why can't other African countries do it?
So would you venture an answer? I mean, when I take into account your statistic that Nigeria's tax revenues are 6% of its GDP, and you mentioned that I think it's almost 70%. I saw.
Debt service to GDP.
Yes, debt service to.
I think it's 66% according to.
To revenues.
Debt service to government revenue.
To revenues. It seems to me as if Nigeria doesn't really need to be worrying about or trying to get inspiration from Ethiopia. It needs to be doing some basic arithmetic, wouldn't you say?
Well, inspiration. At the end of the day, at the end of the day, these issues are structural. Okay, people say you need to increase your tax revenues. When you increase the tax revenue, you need to increase the tax base in the first place.
Right.
Okay. So if 40% of agriculture, or of your GDP is agriculture, for example, and I think now it's down to 30, but let's say 30% is agriculture. If all of that is subsistence agriculture, you're not going to get taxes. If you invested in agricultural productivity, turn these farmers into commercial producers, then you have the tax base and you can tax them. So for me, it's about thinking through and not putting the cart before the horse. How do you tax a farmer who is living on subsistence? But if you doubled, tripled his output, gave him input, gave him training, gave him access to markets, instead of building these, you go to Abuja, it's a beautiful city. It's as beautiful as any other city. Okay? When I was governor of Central Bank, the president of the World Bank came to Abuja and he said he wanted to meet ordinary Nigerians. And this is a story I tell people everywhere. It's an amazing story. There was a Nigerian who came from somewhere in Kogi, and they brought him, and he was in the crowd. And the president said, "Any questions?" And he put up his hand. And he said, my village, okay, there's a river near my village. During the rainy season, I cannot come out. I can't cross it, I can't come out, I'm stuck until, the only reason I'm here is because it's dry season and I walked through the stream and then got a car.
My goodness. But
I came to Abuja and I saw all these bridges and there's no water. Now if you just think of how much we spent building overhead bridges in Abuja so that we can move without going into traffic. We can move, smoothly, and get from place to place smoothly. A fraction of that. Imagine what you'd have done to.
Yeah.
Okay. Last year there was a flood in one of the villages in Kano, and I said I would go and see them. When I went, we had to stay several kilometers away in a near town, because they said the cars could not get to the village.
Wow.
In the rainy season. Now, how do the farmers in that village get their crops to the market?
Right.
So it's simple issues. And for a fraction of the money we're spending, building overhead bridges and underpasses and all that, we could build rural feeder roads that actually bring farmers to markets and goods to farmers, and they would have a far greater impact on GDP for the bottom of the pyramid than what we're doing urbanization is good and development is good, but it's about a thought process, I think.
That's a very good point for asking for more contributions from our fellow guests. What strikes me in your very last point is that probably the two most successful agricultural economies, one has ceased to be successful, but it used to be successful. In sub-Saharan Africa, definitely, would be actually South Africa and Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe has chosen to exit that club, so it's now really down to it's really now down to South Africa. One of the questions for you, which we can come to after listening to the questions, is what is different about the South African and Zimbabwean formula for building a much stronger agricultural base than the other African countries have had. I suspect that there are lessons in there for us. Let me be clear, and this is on the record. I'm not advocating either settler colonialism in Rhodesia or apartheid in South Africa. I just want to be clear. So now with that, what I'd like to do is ask people to put their hands up, ask questions. As you can tell, this is free-flowing, highly opinionated. Take courage and emulate, and let's take advantage of the emir.
What are the policy issues? Of course, some of them are, given in some of your presentation, but I think we need to bring them out in terms of the way forward. And you have been a non-state actor. You are now a state actor, if I have to put it that way. I think we should be able to also say, what have we done? What can we do more? Now, on the issue of poverty, we often discuss poverty in relation to the poor. And I listen to you on population, very, very important. But I also think that there's an inverse relationship between the poverty of many and the damning opulence of the few. And this not from the only communist standing like me. Oxfam released a report about Nigeria that the weight of 5 Nigerians can eradicate extreme poverty of 112 million Nigerians. In fact, Oxfam repeated it last year again that the weight of the richest man in Africa, The richest man in Africa can live on $1 million per day for 42 years continuously in a country in which minimum wage is now $95 per month. Now, the question is that what is the policy implication? I think we need just taxation, progressive taxation. Only the poor pay tax. And when I say poor, working people, because it's pay as you earn. You pay from source. Now, how does it add up that we have this number of poor people, they will produce richest people on the continent? Then the last ones are quickly.
And finally...
No, finally. Finally, about China. You know, I absolutely agree with you. We don't need to be romantic about China, and I'm clear about that. But the key issue you brought back is the issue of beneficiation, industrialization, value addition, which is missing now. Nigeria produces crude oil. We export crude oil. We import petroleum products. You can't create jobs. The same thing in South Africa. Gold mines, platinum, and then we go to Geneva to go and buy trinkets. We need to add value. And for me, what we need here again is conversation. Governors are here. What are they doing to add value? What are they doing? What did you do as the CBN governor in terms of policy, in which you have beneficiation, we have value addition, and create jobs? Thank you very much.
Please go.
Okay. I think Issa has gone over a whole range of. First of all, I think we must understand that over the last few decades, we've had the death of ideology. In a sense, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, while it was seen as a major turning point in history, basically meant that there was no opposition to a whole horde of intellectuals that were advocates of the unbridled free market. And I think for us as Africans, we have remained pawns in a global chess game. And we've not really protected our interests in the manner in which we should have. Starting from the Washington Consensus and opening up our markets and deindustrialization. Look, we go to World Trade Agreements. We go and sign up World Trade Agreements that we're not part of negotiating. Okay, we open up our markets to industrial products. You know, people tell you, go where you have a comparative advantage. And what is the result? Nigeria is Africa's largest producer of oil. Yet, we spend most of our foreign exchange importing petroleum products. The largest export of the United Kingdom and France to Nigeria is petroleum products. And we're an oil-producing country. Okay? We burn off our gas. We don't produce enough power. We produce cocoa. We don't produce chocolates in Nigeria. We import chocolates. We produce cotton. We import our textiles and garments. You know, so we continue importing what we could produce. And by the way, we export what we don't produce. You know, military governments in Nigeria have established democracy in Africa. So that's one of the great achievements of our country. So it's understanding that, and you know, we need to be part of this global discourse. Take migration. I was on a panel in Marrakesh, and people talked about migration in Africa. And, you know, African leaders still go. They get called to France. They go and sit down. We're going to give you 2 billion euro to help stop migration. And ask a simple question. For the last 30 years, we've been told, open up your capital accounts and have free capital flows. Okay? It should be fine for Francis to sit in London or New York and bring dollars into the Nigerian stock market, buy shares, make a profit, sell the naira, buy the dollars, repatriate his profit without restriction. It's good for the world economy. Open up your market to goods, finished products from China, from Bangladesh, from United States. Buy TV sets, you know, buy cars. It's good for your economy. Okay? Sell your raw materials freely. So we told it's fine for goods to move freely. It's fine for capital to move freely, but it is not fine for people to follow the wealth. Okay, so you can sit in New York, bring capital into Africa, make the profits, take out the capital, okay, impoverish because you're taking wealth. I mean, nothing comes out of nothing. The profit that is made by the investor in the United States on his investment is wealth taken out of Africa to America. But the African cannot follow and share in that wealth. Why is it okay for capital to move, for labor, for goods to move, but not okay for human beings to move? Why? And you know what? African leaders go and sit down, and the Germans say, we're going to give you 2 million euros to stop migration, and they're very happy. And you know what it is? It's a fraction of the money we're making out of your countries so that you can keep your nationals in the ghettos that we have created. We need to have a conversation around the global economic structures. We need to protect African production. When you go to France, instead of asking them how many guns you need or how many pounds you need to France, how many euros you need to keep people, why don't you tell them how many solar panels you need to generate electricity and build a factory and create jobs? We don't hear that. 2 billion euro to keep. Why give the money to stop migration? Why not bring in the $2 billion and fix the power system in Nigeria? So you create jobs. If people had jobs, they wouldn't risk their lives in the desert or the Mediterranean to go to Europe. So the migration problem you have is tied to the poverty problem. And it's all tied to global inequality. It's all back to ideology. And I think we're at a point now where voices are being raised. And people are saying that globalization may have had a lot of good, but has not been good for everybody. And some people have actually had the rough end. And maybe it is time to begin to retrace some of those steps and understand that the market has not been as wise and generous to all of us as we thought before. That's and that's why I'm happy that people like you still remain faithful to the old left-wing ideology. I cannot make any pretenses now. Dressed like this, no one would believe that I'm a Marxist. So I will not even I will not even pretend to be one.
Yes, you. Before you make your ask your question, could I just ask everyone to be succinct and focused in their question? Thank you.
So my question is, we kind of have sat down and listened to all the issues and the problems, and I think at different fora we always do this. The problem has always been Africa getting the leadership that is required to actually take the hard decisions, like go to France and then talk about solar panels and not collect money to stop people from migrating. With specific reference, for example, to a place like Nigeria, my question is, how do we get into political office people like you, who can actually take the decisions that are required? And I think this is, for a lot of African countries, a major issue. The political processes we have at the moment in place do not allow us to produce the sort of leadership that can think the way you are thinking and that can take the decisions that are required in order for us to do all the things that we know we should be doing.
You know, to be honest, Kajari, I think that wherever we are, I mean, leadership, I am in a position of leadership today. Okay, so let me give you an example. Okay, one of the big issues I've just talked about demography. Okay, there is no way you're going to address issues around age of marriage, around family planning, around regulating polygyny by just being a politician. You need the traditional and religious institutions. And so in the last 4 years, for example, we had to hammer out, after fighting and arguing and debating with the scholars, a codified Muslim family law for the first time in northern Nigeria. And you know, it's amazing when we're working on this. What I found most remarkable was I got a letter from the President of the Republic of Niger inviting me to Niamey. And he put together every traditional ruler and major scholar in Niger. And he wanted me to talk to them so they would understand that there is nothing un-Islamic about saying, wait until a girl is biologically and emotionally mature enough to be a mother before you marry her off. Space your children. If you cannot maintain 2 or 3 wives, do not marry 2 or 3 wives. Do not produce children and leave them on the street. It's not religion. Now, that has to be done. Because no matter what the politicians do in terms of fixing power and fixing industry, if you continue, I mean, he's a governor, he knows that. If he has a statistic of out-of-school children and he builds enough schools for them, I assure you, by the time the schools are ready, there'll be twice that number waiting at the gate. It's a problem we've got to address. And at the same time, being in this role also got me to understand things I didn't understand before. When I was in the central bank, I dealt with numbers. I'd see X number of Nigerians living on less than $1 a day. When I became emir, every day I saw those people and I saw their lives. I had this Western elitist mentality, people don't want to educate their daughters. Then you go to a village and there's no school. And there are no teachers. So how do you accuse someone of not wanting to educate his daughter when you've not given him the school? It's not a demand problem, it's a supply problem. But it's very easy to blame people and their culture for not seeking education and therefore free those who were responsible for building the schools of that responsibility. And the system cannot hold. The politicians need to be held to account by people who are not politicians. That's how democracy works. The traditional rulers, the religious leaders, the civil society movements have to be there to say, this is what we want. And you also have to teach people what they want. So one of the things we're trying to do in Kano is see if we can get a broad consensus among people. Let people decide that they want to have their daughters educated to senior secondary school. Right now, how do we do our budgets? The president comes with a budget, and the National Assembly approves, the governor does a budget. How many budgets are really driven by what the people want? Do we decide that we want that bridge? Or want that road? Who tells the government that I would rather have fuel subsidy than education for my children? Who takes that decision for me? That you should take money out of the pot for educating my child or for health care for my wife and give me petroleum subsidy? Just a choice. Who made that choice for me? So getting to people, telling people, look, seek education for your goals. And then you can begin to look at the government's budget and say, hey, my friend, you're spending only 10% of budget on education. We actually need more money in education. We can do without these flyovers. So I don't think leadership is about being the president or being a governor or being, I think wherever we are, I certainly, if at this level, for example, I don't think, I don't see myself as a leader, then I have a big problem. And I have to take part of the responsibility for the failings. And so I have to play my part. I hope our brothers, look at our brother Nasiru and Kayode play their part. And it is really all of us together that form the leadership. And hopefully among the next generation of politicians, you're going to have someone who will be the president. I saw Nasiru clapping. He knows, because when I was governor of Central Bank, he had actually come to me to ask me to go into politics. And I said to him, look, I've done well as Central Bank governor because I was a banker. I don't think I would last a month in politics. I don't think I will, but that's a different story.
Okay, let's go to the back.
Hello. So I have a question as a banker, talking about poverty. What about financial inclusion? That's something I didn't hear you speak about. I haven't actually seen on the agenda, but all the things you spoke about. Education, if you can get a loan for when I speak to people, that's what they want, loans for their children's educations. Farmers to sell more produce. The informal economy that you spoke about, how do we get them access to finance? I have invested in, you know, I work in financial inclusion, and I'd love to hear your feelings on how do we do this for Africa.
Okay, well, I've talked about financial inclusion for a long time. I developed the financial inclusion strategy for Nigeria. We started mobile banking. We started the cashless system. We set up MSME funds. It's critical, I think, and especially when you talk about, I think in one of the slides when we talk about decent jobs for women, we talked about microfinance and providing finance for women and financial empowerment. And financial inclusion today is one of the fastest growing areas in the world. And I'm on the board of, as you know, the global board of MTN, and all the telecoms companies will tell you that mobile banking is going to be the future in Africa. You know, in Nigeria, so many people have mobile phones, and it's really about how you can use that as a channel to get finance across to them and bring them into the financial system. It's been prior to mobile banking, the sheer cost of getting inclusion has been prohibitive. It was always brick and mortar. And I think if you look at Ghana today, I think Ghanaian GDP, the last quarter, the fastest growth came from telecoms, and the subset of that was really financial inclusion. It's this whole mobile banking. And it's really about changing financial regulations from bank-led to telco-led models, which they've done. And I think Nigeria is considering doing that. And I do think that there's a lot of room and a lot of scope for that. It's I agree with you. It's just that in a presentation such as this, you can't cover 100% of the issues. Yeah.
I'm afraid when I see Dakile standing, rather.
Look, Dakile just wants to go and drink
rather than sitting.
For those of us who do not drink, this is our period. Please sit there.
For those of you who do not drink in public.
Let me. I realize. Let me just.
I would like to say that I have never had a drink with Dakile in private. He slanders me at every opportunity.
Okay. Well, let me. Dakile is standing, so we have our marching orders. What I'd like to do is just leave some thoughts for us. The answer to the question which the mayor changed to a diplomatic version, perspectives on development in Africa, what he was supposed to talk about, which I must admit he did in a way, was how to stop the manufacturing of poverty on an industrial scale. The answers you've actually heard from some of the things that he's said. Look at the quality of our leadership. Think about the policy deficits that are in there. Focus on some of the cultural factors. Preferences for certain kind of cultural practices relating to gender which need to be fixed. There's quite a lot of food for thought in your remarks, and it provides a welcome base for us to have a couple of days of discussion and debate. I'd like to thank you, but I should leave Dakile to give a better and more fulsome set of thanks. Okay, can we leave you? Okay, great. Okay.
Thanks, Francis.
Okay.
I will stop this slander from now on.
I'll sue you.
My thanks to the Emir and to Francis Daniels.
Nasser is a lawyer.
Yes.
I'll have him sue you when he's out of office on my behalf.
He's also my friend. Thank you so much. I apologize for inflicting this level of seriousness on you after dinner, but I am not sorry at all, because we have to face the reality of the situation that confronts us on the continent. So I thank you again for taking it as seriously as you did, and we are going to have more of this. But we're also not unmindful that some of you, the bitter enders, may choose to have nightcaps. And there is a live band in the hotel bar area, and those of you who want to carry on the conversations there are certainly welcome to do so while listening to music. Tomorrow, we are going to do a lot of extraordinary things, a lot of powerful and hopefully impactful sessions. And I would like simply to highlight at least one of them. Manoj Kumar would be doing an extension of the riff from the Emir tonight by describing to us his thesis of how poverty is entirely man-made and how we can deal with it now. Not in the future, not at some point in the next 3 generations, but now. So on that note, I thank you all for being here, and I will meet some of you in the bar area.